Sean Connery was the world's most iconic leading man. But at the height of his power, he walked away. Why did this legend vanish, and what did he sacrifice? The silence of a night. For over 40 years, the name Sean Connery was synonymous with power, masculinity, and the golden age of cinema. He didn't just play James Bond. He defined the very concept of the modern action hero. He didn't just win an Oscar. He became the elder statesman of Hollywood, the man every director wanted in their corner to provide instant gravitas and weight. He was a force of nature, a man whose presence on screen felt as solid as the Scottish granite he grew up around. But then, the screen went dark. No more red carpets, no more blockbuster announcements, and no more of that unmistakable Scottish burr resonating through theater speakers. In the early 2000s, Sean Connery didn't just retire. He effectively disappeared into a self-imposed exile. While other legends of his era, like Clint Eastwood or Anthony Hopkins, continued to chase the spotlight into their twilight years, Connery chose a quiet life in the Bahamas, far from the cameras that had worshipped him for decades. To the public, it seemed sudden. One day, he was the leader of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and the next, he was a ghost. But the truth is much more complex than a simple desire for a vacation. It was a profound, burning disillusionment with the very industry that had made him a king. To understand why the world's greatest spy decided to stop being seen, we had to look back at the friction that was building long before he finally said never again. We have to look at the man who realized that the only way to win the Hollywood game was to stop playing it entirely. The architect of his own destiny, from milkman to monarch. To understand the weight of Sean Connery's departure, you first have to understand the sheer magnitude of his ascent. He wasn't born into the velvet-lined world of acting. He was Thomas Sean Connery, a boy from the working-class Fountainbridge district of Edinburgh. This was a man who grew up in a home without an indoor toilet, where the family lived in a tenement building. This was a man who worked as a milkman, a bricklayer, and even a coffin polisher. His physical presence was his first ticket out. As a competitive bodybuilder who stood a commanding 6 feet 2 inches, he carried a raw, kinetic energy that Hollywood hadn't seen before. When he stepped into the shoes of 007 for 1962's Dr. No, he didn't just play a spy. He created a cultural archetype. Before Connery, Bond was a literary figure. After Connery, Bond was a global phenomenon. He brought a gritty, dangerous edge to the character, a cruelty, as some critics called it, that captivated the globe. But Connery was a man who loathed being trapped. He spent the late 60s and 70s fighting to escape the shadow of the tuxedo. He wanted to prove he was an actor, not a mannequin. He took risks in films like The Hill, The Man Who Would Be King, and A Bridge Too Far. He survived the transition from young heartthrob to distinguished elder statesman with a grace that few actors ever achieve. He was a perfectionist who demanded the same level of discipline from everyone else on set that he demanded of himself. By the late 1980s, Connery had reached a rare level of untouchable status. His performance as Jim Malone in The Untouchables didn't just earn him an Academy Award. It solidified his image as the ultimate mentor figure. Whether he was playing a Russian submarine captain in The Hunt for Red October or the estranged father of Indiana Jones, Connery brought an instant sense of prestige to every frame. He was the sexiest man alive at age 59, a knight of the realm, and $1 billion asset. He was at the absolute summit of the mountain. And yet, it was at this very peak that the air began to thin. The dissolution, the films he couldn't see. The first signs of his withdrawal weren't visible on screen, but in the roles he chose not to play. This is where the mystery of his exit begins to take shape. Connery was always a man of intuition, and in the late 90s, that intuition began to clash with the direction of modern blockbusters. He was famously offered the role of Gandalf in Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. It was a role that would have earned him hundreds of millions of dollars due to a percentage of the box office. He turned it down. Later, he was offered the role of Morpheus or the Architect in the Matrix trilogy. He turned those down, too. His reasoning was simple and refreshingly honest. I didn't understand them. He didn't understand the scripts, he didn't understand the worlds, and he didn't understand why these films were being made with such a heavy reliance on technology over performance. He saw the industry moving toward a brand of storytelling that felt hollow to him, a world of green screens and idiots in suits who had never stepped foot on a stage. This confusion wasn't a sign of slowing down. It was a sign of a man who refused to participate in art that didn't speak to him. However, after seeing the massive success of the films he passed on, Connery reportedly felt a pressure to catch up with a new era of the blockbuster. This pressure led him directly into the project that would ultimately end his career. The Exit, the breaking point in Prague. The vanishing point for Sean Connery has a name that still carries a heavy weight in Hollywood history: The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. To understand why that film broke him, you have to understand the specific environment of that production. It was 2002, and the industry was in a chaotic transition. Studios were becoming more corporate, directors were becoming more like technical managers, and the old-school craftsmanship Connery prized was being discarded in favor of post-production fixes. The production in Prague was a disaster of biblical proportions. Filming was interrupted by historic flooding that destroyed sets worth $7 million and sent the production into a tailspin. But the internal floods were worse. Connery, a man who believed in discipline, hierarchy, and clear leadership, clashed violently with a young director, Stephen Norrington. The stories from the set are legendary. Rumors described shouting matches that stopped production for hours. At one point, when asked where the director was, Connery reportedly snapped, "Go check the local asylum." He was frustrated by the technical delays, the lack of a clear script, and what he perceived as total incompetence at the helm. For a man who had worked with legends like Alfred Hitchcock and John Huston, this was intolerable. He was reportedly so frustrated that he took a hand in the editing room just to try and save the film from what he perceived as a total lack of vision. When the film was released in 2003, it was panned by critics and struggled at the box office. For Connery, it was the final straw. He wasn't just tired of the bad reviews. He was disgusted by the process. He famously remarked that he was fed up with the idiots who were now running the asylum. He didn't make a grand announcement at first. He simply stopped saying yes. The vanishing, life in the Lyford K. So, where does a legend go when he decides the world has seen enough of him? For Sean Connery, the answer was Lyford K in the Bahamas. This wasn't just a vacation home. It was a fortress of solitude. It was a place where he could be Thomas Sean Connery again, away from the expectations of being Sir Sean or Bond. Life in retirement for Connery was remarkably ordinary, which is perhaps the most extraordinary thing about it. He didn't write a tell-all memoir. He didn't start a podcast to stay relevant. He didn't pop up in Where They Now segments or reality shows. He spent his days playing golf, his lifelong passion, and spending time with his wife of over 40 years, Micheline Roquebrune. Those who caught glimpses of him in the Bahamas described a man who seemed entirely at peace. He enjoyed a glass of scotch, good conversation, and had zero interest in discussing the business. There were attempts to lure him back, of course. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas reportedly tried everything to get him to return for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Fans are desperate to see Henry Jones Sr. one last time. But Connery was resolute. He told the press, "If anything could have pulled me out of retirement, it would have been an Indiana Jones film, but in the end, retirement is just too much damn fun." This refusal to return was a final act of power. In an era where every franchise is rebooted and every actor returns for a legacy sequel, Connery's silence was deafening. He understood something many of his peers didn't, that there is a profound power in knowing when to leave the stage. The private years and the final farewell. As the years stretched into a decade of retirement, Connery's health began to naturally decline, but he kept even this away from the prying eyes of the paparazzi. His wife, Micheline, later revealed that in his final years he struggled with dementia, a battle he fought with the same quiet dignity he applied to his retirement. He didn't want the world to see him as anything less than the titan he was. When Sean Connery passed away peacefully on October 31st, 2020, at the age of 90, it felt like the end of an entire epic. He died in his sleep, in the place he loved, surrounded by the family he had protected from the Hollywood machine. In the end, he got exactly what he wanted, a dignified exit on his own terms. Conclusion: the enduring legacy of No. The mystery of why he walked away isn't really a mystery at all when you look at the character of the man. Connery was a man of the earth, a man of hard work and high standards. When he looked at Hollywood and saw that those standards were no longer being met, when he saw that the art of storytelling was being replaced by the mechanics of the content machine, he just left. He chose his own peace over the public's demands. What did he sacrifice? He sacrificed hundreds of millions of dollars, more awards, and perhaps a few more iconic roles that would have kept him in the headlines. But what did he gain? He gained nearly 20 years of privacy, tranquility, and the chance to be a human being rather than a product. His disappearance remains a masterclass in celebrity management. In a world that demands we be on 24/7, where every moment is shared on social media and every star is accessible, Connery's retreat feels like a radical act of self-respect. He gave us 40 years of his life on screen, and then he kept the rest for himself. As we look back on his career, we realize that Sean Connery didn't lose his way. He found it. He showed us that the most powerful thing a person can do is say no when the rest of the world is begging for yes. He was, and will always be, the gold standard of the Hollywood leading man. A man who knew exactly who he was, even when the cameras stopped rolling. He proved that you don't have to stay until the lights go out. You can walk out while you're still a king, and in doing so, you remain a king forever.